We're going to dive in. We're a couple minutes behind, but this is our last lesson. Brother Ted, do we usually hand out the books this lesson?
You probably should, but
Okay.
you probably should.
Okay. We do. I can hand them out after this. Let's see. Abe, if you can leave the laptop turned up and unmuted for me, just in case I need it. And as soon as I can figure out, there it is. That one. And then if you guys can switch to the Sunday school when you're done. All right, so 19th century. We're going back in time. Prussian Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke the Elder wrote, "No plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main strength." The former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson said it a little less eloquently. I mean, it is Mike Tyson. He says, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." I'd say that's good words there. Your plan kind of goes out the window when you get punched in the mouth, right, David? Yeah. I don't think you have a plan at that point. Mm-hmm. Over the years, Moltke's observation has been shortened to the pithier, "No plan survives first contact with the enemy." No plan survives first contact with the enemy. The history of warfare has repeatedly confirmed this adage. The Normandy invasion during World War II was one of the largest and most extensively planned military operations in history. You know this or something? Okay, all right. It was overseen by some of the world's most brilliant strategists. Unless you're talking to Elijah, he may think otherwise. Including Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Dwight D. Eisenhower. It looks like Jayla is ready. Am I on my correct? Hey, sweet. Youth is dismissed. Have fun. All right, behind me is D-Day. Despite months of planning, the invasion encountered problems from the beginning. So this Normandy invasion had problems. The attack was originally planned for May 1944, but was pushed to the following month due to a lack of landing craft. In June, the weather failed to cooperate. Allied troops were scheduled to make their historic landing on the beaches of Normandy, France, on June 5th. But Eisenhower was forced to call a delay of 24 hours. When the attack finally began shortly after midnight on June 6th, cloud cover hindered visibility. And as a result, the bombardment of German positions by Allied aircraft did not cause as much damage as the Allies had hoped. Which meant the troops landing on the beaches faced stronger than expected resistance. To complicate the matters, some of the landing craft were blown off course, partly because of these unexpected setbacks. The Allies suffered approximately 10,000 casualties on the first day of the attack, while failing to achieve any of their planned objectives. By late June, the Allies had overcome these initial setbacks and achieved their objectives. You may not be planning anything as complicated as an invasion of Europe, but even simple plans are often frustrated by unexpected setbacks and the failure of others to cooperate. And don't look at your spouse. Perhaps that describes you in some way. You had life planned out, but now you are lying on the canvas, flattened by the unexpected. I don't think anybody in here's really dealt with too much of this stuff, but a divorce, terrible diagnosis, a company downsizing, or the death of someone you loved. King Solomon observed, "We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps," in Proverbs 16, verse 9. An old Yiddish proverb says this: "Man plans and God laughs." I think I've heard that a few times in a different way. God must have a sense of humor. He's probably up there laughing at me, trying to do what I want to do. If God is laughing, it's not because he doesn't love us. He just has a better plan than ours.
Yes, right.
We need to trust him and follow his plan wherever he may lead. So, God's plan for Paul. We've been talking about Paul this series, so let's look at him a little bit. So Acts chapter 27 opens with the words, "And when it was determined." And when it was determined. Paul was in the custody of Roman soldiers, and he was traveling by ship to stand trial in Rome. Few things are as regimented as soldiers and ships. Soldiers follow predetermined orders, and ships sail according to predetermined schedules. And I can attest to that because of the cruise that I was on a couple months ago. It'd be a little odd if my cruise ended up in Australia. Number one, why is it taking so long to get to where we're going? We must really be cruising. But they have a predetermined schedule. Paul's life seemed to be mapped out for the foreseeable future. He was on his way to Rome, where he hoped to be granted the opportunity to preach the gospel to Caesar himself. The New Testament hints that Paul was the kind of person who saw value in planning and organization. He was responsible for overseeing churches and ministers in many different cities and provinces. And his feat would have taken some degree of coordination. My tongue is tied today. He also wrote letters sharing his plans with others. We know he was determined because he stuck to his plan to visit Jerusalem, despite repeated warnings that it wouldn't go well for him there. And you can look at Acts chapter 21, verses 4 through 14 for that. In response to his friends' objections, Paul answered, "I am ready not to be bound only, but also to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus," in Acts chapter 21, verse 13. Paul did not abandon his plans on a whim. Neither the soldiers nor the sailors who accompanied Paul and his companions anticipated their carefully crafted schedules were about to be blown off course. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The storm would shape events in ways none of them expected. Paul was an experienced traveler. who had spent much time aboard ships. He undoubtedly had acquired some knowledge of sailing from these previous voyages. In 2 Corinthians 11:25, I almost read that as 2 Corinthians 2, because they put the Roman numerals there. 2 Corinthians 11:25, Paul noted that he had been shipwrecked 3 times. Either he's got issues with boats, or he just gets on the wrong boat a lot. Thankfully, the 2 boats that I've been on, the large ones, have not been shipwrecked. I've seen videos of where they had to do an emergency docking at a beach. That's a fun video. And I've seen a lot of shipwrecks. Yeah, Titanic's the big one. The most recent one is the Spanish ship that crashed. I think it was this past week. They didn't calculate something right. And the top of their mast or whatever it is clipped a bridge. Not good. There were a couple casualties, several injured. But Paul said that he had been on 3 shipwrecks. That's pretty rough. Although we are not certain of the timeline of these incidents, we don't know if it was back to back. We don't know if it was a couple years apart. We really don't know what his statistics were for ship sailing. But the apostle may have endured shipwrecks prior to his voyage in Acts chapter 27. Some scholars date the writing of Paul's second epistle to the Corinthians prior to his voyage in Acts chapter 27. So this may have been his 4th shipwreck. Just might have been. Consequently, Paul may have recognized the ominous weather developing in the skies over the Mediterranean Sea, which may be why he issued this warning to the ship's officers. In Acts chapter 27, verse 10, says, "Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives." He's looking at the weather, and he's saying, guys, you might want to turn around or get ready, because we're going to see a lot of damage. Not just the boat, but you too. He knew it was coming. The ship's captain and its owner ignored Paul's advice and proceeded with their travel plans because the weather forecast appeared favorable to them. They were checking the weather app and they're like, it doesn't say anything about rain. It says a 10% chance. And the thing that people get wrong with weather apps is that 10% is not a 10% chance of it actually raining today. It is a 10% of the area that you are in will receive rain. If you didn't know, now you know. So they're saying it's going to rain today for 10% of the land. In this case, the sea. And they were probably thinking, yeah, this is just, it's not going to hit us. Anybody been there? Just look at the sky and you're like, nah, it won't come here. And then boom. I remember thinking I would never have a tornado touchdown in my backyard, Brother David, and then it did. It's kind of cool. Yeah. I was sitting in the living room. We had these big windows and then a big window above it. It was a sliding door down below. The wind's picking up, and I can see the glass on the sliding door bending inwards. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I got up and went up to the door and was looking outside, watching the rain coming down. I saw sticks coming down from this tree that had been dead. And then all of a sudden the sticks went from like this angle to straight. And I said, okay, time to go to the basement. And then I heard what my mom described tornadoes as. If you hear a train whistle during a storm, it's probably a tornado. If you don't know, now you know. So yeah, Paul could tell. He's saying, look, the sticks are flying sideways here. And the captains are like, it'll blow over. It'll be fine. We're not worried. When the south wind blew softly, they set sail for Phoenix, a port on the coast of Crete, where they hoped to spend the winter. They hadn't sailed far when that soft wind mushroomed into a fierce storm. I've been in a few of those. One was at Kings Island. It was like, oh, this is a nice breeze. This is great. A great day to be at Kings Island. And then all of a sudden, the sky went real dark real quick, like somebody turned out the lights. Everybody started hiding in the souvenir shops. That was a fun day. The ship and its passengers were exceedingly tossed with a tempest. And so all hope that they should be saved was then taken away. That's said in Acts chapter 27, verses 18 and 20. The sailors desperately began trying to save the ship and their own lives from destruction. Amid the chaos, God sent an unexpected visitor. An angel boarded the ship with a message for Paul. Fear not, the angel said calmly. Thou must be brought before Caesar. And that's Acts 27:24. So, nobody has to answer this, but I want you to think about it. Has God ever given you a promise during a difficult time? And how did that help you endure? So Paul was reassured by the angel's promise that despite appearances, everything was proceeding according to plan. God's plan. God wanted there to be a crazy storm. Paul probably had no clue why. But at least he knew God wasn't trying to kill him. Paul gathered his fellow shipmates so he could share the message with them, and he could not resist opening the "I told you so" in Acts 27:21. But Paul astounded them when he continued, "I exhort you to be of good cheer." That seems like a strange thing to say in the middle of a storm, in the middle of a sea. I mean, it wasn't like the type of ships we have nowadays where it has all sorts of fancy technology. Be of good cheer. Okay. I'm about to fall overboard, dude. Tie me to the mast. For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you. It seems like a turnaround. Because he started off by saying there's going to be some damage to both ship and crew. Now he's saying nobody's going to die. You might break a limb or something. Get a concussion, something, I don't know. There will be no loss of any man's life among you. No one on board felt any cheer, I'm sure. But those who knew Paul and knew him well knew everything was going to be all right. In times of uncertainty and fear, the world needs to hear from those who have heard from God. Who comforteth us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. 2 Corinthians 1:4. We can kind of understand this strong storm that Paul is going through. But we also need to be like Paul and try and spread the good news in the midst of the storm. There is hope. The storm will end. We can make it through this. God has it. Sometimes that's all somebody needs to hear, is that God's in control. He can get you through this. Doesn't matter if they're in church or not. Sometimes people just need to hear there is still hope, even though it seems hopeless. They probably had a tsunami on them. I don't know. Can you have a tsunami in the Mediterranean Sea? A hurricane, something, I don't know. They call it a tempest. No one on board probably felt much cheer. And in times of uncertainty and fear, the world will need to hear from somebody who hears from God. With this outlook, trials and tests become opportunities for ministry, not reasons for despair. I talked about it on Wednesday. We could all have our own pity party. And when you start gathering up other people who just kind of add fuel to the fire, it just becomes one big pity party. So don't be the one that adds fuel to the fire, making things seem a little more bleak and hopeless. Be the one who is proclaiming hope, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. It becomes an opportunity for ministry. And with Paul, we can face the storm and declare to others, be of good cheer. Be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told to me. He says that in Acts 27:25. Be of good cheer, for I believe God. It doesn't say for you believe God. I believe God. I believe what he told me is true. I believe that we are going to make it through to the other side. If you start speaking that way, hey, I believe what God told me, they're going to start catching on. Despite Paul's words of assurance, the storm still raged. And he told the assembled crew, we must run aground on a certain island. Kind of like what I was talking about with that video that I saw of a cruise ship. Emergency docking at the beach. Because that was their only way to try and survive. Paul's telling them, just you need to find ground and get there. The danger was far from over because a ship run aground was vulnerable to pounding waves. So if you run it aground during a storm, it's even worse because you still have the waves that are coming in, especially if it's like hurricane type waves. Those things get big. And so it's vulnerable to those waves and would eventually break apart because they didn't have steel ships back then. It was wood. And wouldn't you know it, it would fall apart. But Paul trusted that God's plan and promise would prevail over any immediate dangers. God could have allowed Paul to rebuke the storm and command it to cease, just as Jesus did. In all three of the Gospels. You can see that in Matthew 8:23 through 27, Mark 4:35 through 41, and Luke 8:22 through 25. However, God chose to let Paul and his companions endure the storm while providing them with a promise from an angel that they would be safe. Paul and his fellow travelers undoubtedly would have preferred a quick rescue from danger. I'm sure they would have preferred Jesus to come in and say, "Peace, be still," to the storm. But that wasn't happening. The storm continued to rage. It wasn't God's plan to do it that way. Instead, they rode out the storm, confident God would keep them safe. Some of them probably confident. Others may have had doubts. We usually prefer a quick solution and immediate resolution to our problems. Nobody likes to stick in their problems. Nobody likes to dwell in it. But in many instances, God allows us to face the storm. The only way we can do this successfully is to trust that His plan will prevail in the end. We will survive. We may run aground, but God will be with us in all circumstances. When danger threatens our safety, our survival instincts kick in. It's everyone for themselves kind of a thing. That becomes our cry. This proved to be the case on board the ship on which Paul was traveling. When it appeared the ship would be crushed on the rocks, the crew prepared to escape. They lowered a lifeboat as if they were going to lower the anchors, but Paul recognized their true intentions and warned the centurion, "Except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved." That's Acts 27:31. Stay on the ship. If you abandon ship now, you will definitely die. I could preach right there. Stay on the ship. While the crew members were thinking only of saving themselves, Paul was looking out for the good of all those who were around him. He encouraged everyone to eat because they had gone 2 weeks without food. 2 weeks. That's a long time. Talk about a fast. He promised, "There shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you," in Acts 27:34. Paul's really trying to encourage these guys. Don't do it. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. I heard from God. I believe what God said. I know He's going to do it. Stick with me, and we'll get to it. We'll get to the other side. Having made this promise, he offered a prayer of thanksgiving and began to eat. His attitude of calm assurance proved to be contagious, because Luke wrote, "Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat." Now, I don't know if some of them thought that this was their last meal. And maybe they just said, "You know what? Let's just enjoy it while I can." And I think sometimes we get those type of people here in the church. They come in and they're like, "I don't have any other options. I might as well enjoy it while I'm here." And then, boy, it changes them.
Yeah, right.
because they end up on the other side of the storm. And they're like, oh, they were serious. They did know what was going on. They're not just living on cloud nine. As Paul warned, the ship ran aground and began breaking apart in the crashing waves. Fearing the prisoners on board would seize the opportunity for escape, some soldiers decided to kill them all to prevent it from happening. Well, that seems great. Y'all were just, in a good mood, and then all of a sudden, we're going to take that good mood and we want to keep it as long as we can, so let's kill all the prisoners because they could kill us. But the centurion wanted to save Paul's life, so he called off the mass execution. Before this fateful voyage, the centurion ignored Paul's counsel, but watching him maintain calm and peace likely caused him to respect and to listen to Paul. There was certainly something special about him. The soldiers heeded the centurion's order, and Paul and all the prisoners with him were spared. We don't always see the immediate benefits of faithfulness, but trusting God does pay off in the long run. More is riding on our response to adversity than just our own future. Sometimes people who are not in the church, they're looking to see what you're going to do, how you're going to act whenever a storm comes your way. Are you going to be calm and trying to encourage people? Or are you lashing out because you're in that mindset of everyone for themselves? The moment of crisis is often our greatest opportunity to minister to others. Because of Paul's faith, all 276 people aboard the ship were spared. It's doubtful anyone on board that ship ever forgot Paul or his testimony about the God he served. Paul's faith and trust in God's plan became a witness to those around him. Acts 27:44 opens up with the beginning to a happy ending. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. But that wasn't the end. 3 verses later, disaster struck again. Stay away from Paul. Oh, man. This time it was in the form of a venomous viper, which I'm going to switch to that title there. Boom. It wasn't that one, but, Paul was gathering sticks for a fire because he understood ministry is serving. And when the heat from the flames caused the snake to lash out at the nearest living target, which happened to be Paul's hand, surviving a shipwreck only to be bitten by a snake would probably feel like the ultimate act of divine justice. A lot of us might see it as God's trying to tell me something here. The natives of the island immediately assumed Paul was a murderer who was only getting what he deserved. Keep it in mind, they didn't know who the prisoners were or what they had done. He's a prisoner. He must be a murderer. That's why the snake bit him. Why do we put so much power in snakes? They watched and waited for Paul to drop dead at any moment. But once again, God had a plan. Paul shook the viper off and remained unharmed. God used this seeming disaster to bring revival to the island of Melita. Melita? I don't know. Say it how you want. Most of us would prefer to live the rest of our lives without enduring either a shipwreck or a snake bite. Unless you're one of those churches with snakes. I don't understand that. I do, but I don't. If you don't know why we don't do the snake thing, you can come to me afterwards. I can help you out. I went on to the wrong paragraph. Here we are. All right, so for Paul, it was all in a day's work. A shipwreck, I've seen it before. Snake bite, nothing but a scratch. It's just another day in the ministry. Yet he trusted God would have the final say in all of these circumstances. When we allow God to call the shots in our life, we can expect to face the unexpected. So when we fully trust on God and we are trying to follow after Him, there may be something that comes up, but we need to make sure that how we act in those circumstances is still following Him. I'd love to be more like Paul in that regard. Snake bites me. Yeah, well, it's for the ministry. We can also expect that He will work all things for our good, as stated in Romans 8:28. That doesn't mean that everything's going to be sunflowers and roses. That means that whatever's coming your way, God's going to make something good out of it. Not you're going to have a happy day the rest of your life. Because the Bible does say that trials and tribulations will come. It wasn't talking about just the end times. It's talking about our life. Because trials and tribulations are going to come. But we need to choose to serve God no matter what the circumstance and to follow Him. After Paul shook off the snake in the fire and having suffered no harm, the residents of Melita changed their tune and started to worship Paul as a god. That's a bit extreme. But who knows how these people were? They probably thought that. It says it right there. They probably thought only gods can survive one of these snakes. And obviously he rejected their worship. But he did pray for the father of a man named Publius. You'd say it how you want. And God healed him. Then God healed many more on the island. Only God can turn a shipwreck and a snake bite into an opportunity for miraculous healing. After a while, Paul and his traveling companions left the island with everything they needed for the remainder of their journey, as well as many honors, as mentioned in Acts 28:10. More importantly, they left the island with increased confidence that the God who had saved them from a shipwreck and had delivered Paul from a venomous viper's bite would surely fulfill His purpose in them and bring His plans to completion. Amazing Grace by John Newton says, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. So the shipwreck in Acts chapter 27 was not the last nautical disaster in Christian history. The conversion of the hymnist and former slave trader John Newton. Oop, there we go. John Newton. He's on the screen behind me, I assume. It's some guy. It's probably John Newton. I'm just thinking of that car picture I threw up that one time and said it was one, and it was totally different. Said it right there on the fender. Oh well. Oop. So John Newton also has become a well-known part of Christian tradition. Newton was born in London in 1725. His mother was a pious Christian, but she died when Newton was only 7. At age 11, Newton joined his father, a merchant ship captain, at sea. In time, Newton became engaged in the transatlantic slave trade. He eventually was pressed into service in the British Royal Navy, but he loathed the rigid discipline of military life and eventually deserted. He was soon captured and flogged for his desertion. Newton became a habitual, unrepentant sinner, admitting to being exceedingly vile. He wrote, I not only sinned with a high hand myself, but made it my study to tempt and seduce others upon every occasion. Ironically, this slave trader was briefly enslaved himself on the African coast, an experience that apparently did little to change his thinking about the institution of slavery. Contrary to popular lore, Newton was not converted in a single flash of divine inspiration. Instead, several influences led him back to his mother's Christian faith, the most famous being an incident that occurred on March 10th, 1748, which was a severe storm. At least one sailor was swept overboard by the fierce waves, and the ship quickly filled with water. Scared for his life, Newton recognized he was not ready to meet God. He repented of his wicked lifestyle and habits and vowed to change. For the rest of his life, Newton celebrated March 10th as the date of his conversion. Despite his change of heart, it took time for him to come to terms with the sinfulness of the slave trade. Boy, I got lost quick. But as the years passed, he began to see he was helping to perpetuate a great evil. He eventually returned to England and became an Anglican clergyman. During this season of life, he penned the words to Amazing Grace. And it's perhaps the most popular hymn in the history of modern Christianity. I think just about everybody knows the song Amazing Grace, at least in the States. So they've heard it some way, some form. In his later years, Newton became a spiritual advisor to the famed abolitionist William Wilberforce. Newton also wrote Thoughts Upon the American Slave Trade, in which he expressed remorse for his former occupation and the hope this stain of our national character will soon be wiped out. That is in quotes. Thanks in large part to Wilberforce's influence, slavery was abolished across the British Empire in 1807, not long before Newton's death. God sometimes allows storms to blow into our lives, not to sweep us off of our course, but to push us in the direction that He has planned for our lives. When storms arise, we must look to God and submit to His purpose and His plan. If we do not, we may find the storm as the turning point in the story that He is writing for our lives. If we could all stand, let's end with prayer. Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for the lesson today on the storms that come our way, the different trials and tribulations that come our way, that we can trust that you have it all in your hands, that you have a plan for our life, that all things you will work together for our good. God, I pray that we wouldn't just take comfort in this and be encouraged in this, but we would also try to encourage others around us in these dark times, dark days, where hope seems to be a rare sight. God, I pray that you would use us to help encourage people and to help give them hope and show them that there is a better way. God, I pray that you would use us this week in Jesus' name. Amen. Y'all are dismissed for a few minutes.